not as a person, but as an OT security professional. What's your value? How much more is your value than a hardworking entry-level person or AI? I believe that your worth is going to be largely based on your ability to make and communicate decisions on what cyber risk management reductions to do, and more importantly, what not to do. Now, I started in OT security 25 years ago and have done many risk assessments. Notice I called them risk assessments. We did identify vulnerabilities, but we put them in one of three categories. We called ours exposures, concerns, and observations. But others do this and they have their own names for them. Our deliverable was a long report, often over 50 pages, and had 30 to 100 concerns and exposure level findings. And this was even if we took all the missing security patches and just called it apply security patches, and it was only one finding. Clients were overwhelmed. They were frustrated. They said, we can't do all that. Some clients even would just take the report and stick it in a drawer. We'd come back the next year for our annual assessment and see nothing changed at all. And then I was frustrated. Sure, they paid us good money, but nothing changed. It was such a waste of time, a feeling of failure. We hadn't helped them. In 2007, one client finally said it. Your report doesn't help us. I need you to tell me what to do first, second, and third, and it has to be achievable. Now, I was a cybersecurity consultant with professional liability. I couldn't leave risks out of the report, but I could give them a prioritized list by efficient risk reduction. Where should they spend their next dollar or hour that they have to address OT cyber risk management? What should they do first, second, third? After that, in every report, we included a top 5 list of things to do in the first 6 months and another top 5 list of things to do in the next year. Once we did this, we provided these top 5 lists, we saw a dramatic risk reduction in our clients, in the asset owners. They applied their limited resources to a small number of achievable tasks that maximized risk reduction. They succeeded, and they could demonstrate this success to management. And maybe more importantly, they decided what they weren't going to do, what cyber hygiene they were not going to do, at least not for the next 18 months. We need you, the true OT security professionals, to make these decisions, to set this prioritization. Or we can continue to fail as a community in most things except maybe volume of guidance documents. Prioritization is needed more than ever in 2025. CISA in the United States, CISA has created a list of 38 security practices that are top or highest priority. Hear that, 38 highest priority. IEC 62443 has a list of 51 foundational system security requirements. These lists keep getting longer and longer. Why? Well, you're more likely to be blamed for leaving something off the list than you are for having too many items on the list. Have you ever felt that fear as a security professional? If I don't say to put every item on this list, then I'll be blamed if there's going to be a cyber incident? Now, these security good practices, they're not wrong. Very few are bad practices. But we can't do it all. It's too much. And I would contend we shouldn't do it all. Why spend money on any action that isn't appreciably reducing consequence or likelihood? Now, your favorite vendor, your favorite industry group, they might have come up and narrowed it down to a top 5 list or a top 10 list. At best, this is a data point for you, not something for you to follow blindly. There are commonalities in the systems we see. right? You see the same issues and vulnerabilities as you go out and do your work. But what I've found is even if I come across two asset owners with almost identical vulnerabilities, the top 5 list of actions differs in each one. Your value is determining and setting that prioritization. That's what we need you to do. I don't get out much anymore. S4 keeps me so busy that I don't get to do much consulting. But I actually did an assessment last year, and it was a lot of fun. I got to get out there in the field, get dirty, learn a new facility and a business. And it probably wouldn't surprise you that I found a lot of the OT cyber assets were missing patches. What might surprise you is that applying OT security patches didn't appear in my top 5 list. Now, I don't think that would have happened 10 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago. So what's changed? Well, 2 things. First, I identified and considered a lot more risk reduction choices. Now, when I started writing this talk, I thought it was going to be about barbell theory. That's the idea that you can achieve success at a lower risk if you address the 2 extremes rather than addressing the middle or a normal distribution. You might have heard Nassim Taleb talk about this in finance. His investment strategy is to have very high risk, high reward investments and near 0 risk investments. Barbell theory applies to a lot of disciplines, and I'd argue it applies to OT cyber risk management. Now, I was going to bring a barbell on stage, but if any of you have ever lifted weights, you know that you can have a very embarrassing, dangerous accident if it's just a little bit off. So I brought this seesaw, this teeter-totter on instead. So if we're looking at reducing risk, we have 2 basic ways of doing this, right? We can reduce the likelihood of a cyber incident, or we can reduce the consequence if a cyber incident occurs. What we have seen since the dawn of OT cyber risk awareness, an almost exclusive focus on security controls to reduce likelihood. We keep putting more and more of these on, whether they're effective or not, and almost completely ignore consequence. 35 of those 38 CISA highest priority security practices to reduce likelihood. 48 of those 51 IEC 62443 requirements are also to reduce consequence. We are unbalanced. We need to get balanced. Now, the main reason why apply security patches didn't appear in my top 5 list was 3 of those top 5 were consequence reduction actions. And it wasn't even a hard choice. The data was so clear. They had massive risk reduction with very low cost and effort. Now, so I told you that's one reason why. The second reason was that I used my knowledge and experience to identify, evaluate, and prioritize the security actions. Or not the security, the risk reduction actions. We're balanced. You might say, well, Dale, didn't you always do that? And yes, I always did that, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But I have to admit that I was held back by conventional wisdom. The easy answers, the things that you could put in a report or in a briefing and people would shake their heads and agree and nod off and sign. What I did that was different, and what I'm asking you to do, is to not be stuck to that conventional wisdom. To not fall into the fact of saying, I'm going to do this good security practice list. I'm going to follow this recommended cyber hygiene to cover my ass, even though I know you won't fund it all, even if I know that you gave me a huge budget, I couldn't accomplish it in 3 years. Now, this isn't easy because The easy way to do it is just get this checklist and do what you're supposed to do. This requires some hard work. You have to find the actions on both sides of the equation, and you have to prioritize them, and then you have to explain to management in a way they understand and can accept why these choices are made of what you're doing and what you're not doing. Now, I gave everyone in here a copy of my book, A Year in OT Security. And I hope you don't throw it in the garbage. If you're going to throw it in the garbage, give it to someone else or bring it down. But I hope you enjoy it. But you might think that that book is my list of what you should do. It's not. It's a book of questions and tasks. I have no idea what's right for your OT environment. But these are some of the things that you should consider and make decisions on. Two very highly qualified OT security professionals in this audience could go back to their water facilities with the book, do all the weekly tasks, and still come up with two very different security programs. Now, I don't want to say that OT security good practice is completely worthless. You need to know OT security good practice. You need to know it completely thoroughly. It is kind of the baseline of what you need to know. But you need to know the rules before you break the rules. Or I like the way Picasso put it better. Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And I'm waiting for someone with the title OT security artist. Show me that if you get it. So you need to be prepared for a world where knowing these OT security rules is just the first step, and your value is knowing how and when to break these rules. You need to prepare for a world where being able to parrot a list of good security practices and do an assessment against a checklist isn't worth that much. It's not going to be worth that much. It's not going to be highly valued as a job. We can hire and train people to do this. And the novelty of OT security is ending, whether this is right or not. I wouldn't even call someone who can repeat OT security good practice and audit to a checklist an OT security professional. At best, maybe an OT security apprentice. Now, I get people sometimes that will call me and ask me what I should do. I just started, I got responsibility for OT security in my company, and I'm just starting, and they have some questions for me. Let's say it's Steve who works for a manufacturer, and the manufacturer has 60 plants. Steve calls me up and says, what OT asset inventory product should I buy? He does this probably because I've been covering that market since 2016. Now, I'm not going to give him a straight answer or say take a consulting gig for it, but I want to point him in the right direction. So I need to know a little bit about his environment and a little bit about a security program. Steve is just beginning in OT security, his company is. They've implemented almost no OT security controls, and their OT and IT isn't segmented. It's one network. Even the PLCs are on the corporate network. Is buying and deploying an OT asset inventory the right thing for Steve to do? Well, let's go back to the seesaw and use it to visualize leverage and efficient risk reduction. And when I spec this out, the boxes got too big, so I'm going to need a little help out here. Thanks, guys. You take care of this side. I'll take that. So have you ever been on a teeter-totter with someone that's heavier than you? Just put it right on there, guys. Okay. It's not a lot of fun, right? You're stuck up in the air, and your heavier friend is stuck on the ground. But if your heavier friend moves far enough to the center of the fulcrum, the opposite happens. You're on the ground, your heavier friend's stuck in the air. Classic leverage, right? A smaller force can move a larger weight the further away it is from the center point or fulcrum. So what we're going to use the seesaw for this time is to demonstrate efficient risk reduction. So guys, can you grab that one for me? Thank you. So on this side of the teeter-totter, we have risk, and on the other side, we're going to put actions to reduce risk. The further away from the center point, the more risk reduction you achieve. So you get more leverage. But that's only one of two factors. The other factor is based on the size and weight of the box. And the way I'd like you to think about that is the size and weight of the box is the inverse of the time and money it takes to implement and maintain the action. So if I had an action that cost $1 and had massive risk reduction, it would be a box the size of this room that would sit on the end here. Maximum leverage, maximum force. If I had an action that cost $100 million and achieved almost no risk reduction, it'd be a tiny little box placed about here. Okay, let's put it all together now. Steve is planning on implementing and hopefully maintaining an asset inventory at his 60 plants. That is not a small project. That's a pretty large project to do and maintain. So not a big box, a smallish sided box. This is the force. So then we have to decide how much risk reduction are we getting for this action. Now I would argue this is not going to stop cyber incidents, so it's not going to reduce the likelihood. It might help me a little bit recover, so it might address consequence, but it's going to be pretty near the center. Now, most of these products also have detection. So let's say Steve is planning on also implementing the detection feature. This would increase the reduction in likelihood and consequence. It might move out a little bit, but remember, this is going to cost us more. Quite a bit more on an ongoing basis to do the detection. So when we look at this, this is probably not the thing Steve should do from an efficient risk reduction standpoint. So let's try another example here as the boxes get heavier. What about segmenting the OT and IT network? Okay, I would argue that that has maximum likelihood reduction. It's usually the thing I think of that would reduce likelihood by the most. And you could argue about the size of the box. It's not a tiny project to put in 60 firewalls or something else to segment your network at the 60 manufacturing plants. So it would probably go somewhere like here. So it has more leverage and more force per unit of work. So this would be higher on the risk reduction list than this. Now, 10 years ago maybe, 20 years ago certainly, I would have had segmenting OT and IT highest on my efficient risk reduction list because I wouldn't be considering the consequence side of the equation, and this would reduce this would reduce likelihood, but more than anything. But now I would say not so fast. This might not be the thing we should do. I mean, let's talk about getting OT off the internet. This is something that isn't as hard to do as segmenting 60 networks. So it's probably a smaller box, or I mean a much larger box, more force. I'm not sure I can put it up here, but let me try. Let's see if we can weigh over risk. Ugh. Oh, we almost got risk going there. So OT off the internet, smaller project, bigger box. Near the end, you could say maybe this would reduce likelihood more, maybe this would reduce likelihood more. But this would probably be something you'd want to do before segmentation even, because it's very easy and achieves a lot of leverage, a lot of efficient risk reduction. And you can go on and on with this. Secure remote access. I was going to try to bring up default passwords, but the box was too big for me. And I think this is really an interesting case because this shows where your judgment is needed. Changing default passwords typically is not difficult unless they're hard-coded in or they're really old systems. But changing default passwords of a level 1 device, a PLC, I would argue that device is insecure by design. That's not going to get you much risk reduction. Changing default passwords of cyber assets accessible from outside the OT zone, that's going to be on this end. So you might, even as a security professional, split this into 2 different risk actions. And if you took something like replace all insecure by design PLCs with a secure PLC, if it had enough features, it might go all the way on the end here with maximum leverage. But that rip and replace is going to be very expensive, very time consuming. Be a tiny little box, so it'd be pretty low. Now, do you agree with all my size and placement of the boxes? No, probably not, and that's fine. In fact, it varies a lot based on the system, process, and business. You have a decision to make. Are you going to join the chorus that is trying to mandate an increasingly long list of security controls and stoke hysteria of potential consequence? Now, this is the safer path. If something goes wrong and they didn't fund and implement everything you recommended, you can say, it's not my fault, I warned you. It's a safer, easier, more crowded path. It's also not that valuable. Thanks. You gave me an impossibly long list of things to do and tried to scare me into doing it. You're not helping me. Or you can use your experience, knowledge, wisdom to identify, evaluate, and prioritize what security actions and what consequence reduction actions to have. The people that do this are the people that are going to be valuable in the future, the people that are going to be worth a lot, the people that are actually going to create the future, reduce OT cyber risk. Let me close with this. It's not about agreeing with me. It's not about agreeing with Ralph Langner or Rob Lee or Joel Langell or Jen Easterly or anyone with a loud and strong point of view. What we need is early adopters and leaders, like the people in this room. We need you to be brave enough, flexible, and to do the hard work to determine what is the right OT security risk management approach for the system you're working on. So be brave, make your own decisions, and enjoy S4. Thanks.